Well, hello and welcome to Off the Bench here on a Tuesday. I'm Reed Mouse. We have a great show for you. We were all geared up, ready to go, had a full show flow. This is the first segment. This is the second segment. This is the third segment. Then about 5 minutes ago, we get the news that the Cincinnati Bengals have signed both Mike White and Sean Clifford to the practice squad. So ending pretty much any debate about what they were going to do at the quarterback position at a long take, and I still probably we'll get into that. Producer today, Stone Shields. Stone, as always, it's nice to have you in the room.
Of course, happy to be here, Reader.
Yeah, it's gonna be a great show. Stone's gonna have a great show for you up here at 11 so stay tuned for all of that. It is week 3 in the NFL season. We've wrapped up 2 weeks. The Bengals are 2-0 for the first time since 2018, but as you know, it's kind of a somber note here in Cincinnati because of the injury to our star elite quarterback Joe Burrow, and everyone was sitting around wondering what in the world the Cincinnati Bengals were going to do. Pretty much from the rip of when you heard that Joe Burrow was going to miss extended period of time, he went to several foot specialists, toe specialists, and every single one of them said, yeah, you can't play on it. You're going to need surgery. This isn't going to heal in a couple of weeks. This is going to take a surgical procedure and then about a 3-month at the minimum to get back and ready to play. So if you're positive, the earliest the Joe Burrow could come back is the second time we play the Baltimore Ravens in, I believe it'd be week 15, so our fourth to last game of the season. And people started wondering, okay, no Joe. The Bengals were lucky enough to win their first 2 games in which they probably shouldn't have won, but they did win, which is a complete contrast to what happened last year where there were several games that the Bengals should have won that they didn't. So you put yourself in a good situation. We talked about it yesterday. You're 0-2, season's done. You're 0-2, you start trading off pieces, and you start trading Trey Hendrickson and seeing what you can do going forward. You're 1-1, you're kind of in this limbo, but the Bengals are 2-0. So speculation came out. What if the Bengals went out and got Kirk Cousins, who is sitting behind Michael Penix in Atlanta? What if the Bengals went and got Jameis Winston, who's a third stringer in New York? What if the got Malik Willis, who's in Green Bay? And there was reports that the Bengals were actively reaching out to teams going, hey, what would it take to bring this guy in? Which surprised me. I'll admit that. Surprised me. But I ended the show yesterday kind of arrogantly, kind of stuck my nose up and was like, listen, if you're a fan that thinks that the Bengals are going to go out and get a Kirk Cousins, if you're a fan that thinks that the Bengals are going to go out and get a Jameis Winston, you've been living in a different reality than I have as a Bengals fan my entire life. It's the same conversation that we do every single trade deadline. Bengals need to add here. Bengals need to add here. And the only acquisition that the Bengals have made in my lifetime at the trade deadline was for a third-string running back last year who didn't really play at all. So I guess what I'm saying is why were we expecting the Bengals to be something that they haven't been to this point? And news broke that the Bengals come out and they signed Mike White and Sean Clifford to the practice squad today. It was clear that the Bengals needed to they had to make some sort of a signing for a quarterback because they were missing one. Joe Burrow's going to be gone. So you bump the practice squad guy up to the active roster. You need to sign somebody else. And I always figured that the Bengals, and I was correct, always figured that the Bengals were just going to get a guy that had floated around several different rosters, that has had time as a starting quarterback, and it's Mike White and Sean Clifford. Shout out to the GCL alum, Cincinnati boy. But that's what I think is a decent signing. Obviously, everyone remembers the Mike White game. It was, I believe, the Super Bowl year. Bengals were playing the New York Jets. Maybe it was the year right after the Super Bowl. I actually watched that game. I've told this story on air before. I watched that game at my wife's grandmother's house, where my wife's family's not into sports a whole lot, and I am laser focused, locked into the screen. And it's a quiet room, and I am MFing the TV at my wife's grandma's house because Mike White is torching the Bengals defense for upwards of 420 yards, something crazy like that, in his first ever start. And he had some success as a starting quarterback for the New York Jets. But this is what the Bengals were always going to do. And I think that's where they should be. It's a much different conversation to where I just said the Bengals would never take Kirk Cousins. The Bengals would never go out and get a Jameis Winston. The Bengals would never do that. It's a much different conversation if the Bengals win this week, they win in 2 weeks, they're 4-0, and then Jake Browning goes down. I think it was always going to be Jake Browning's going to be the starting guy. And he's earned that. He has absolutely earned that. Ever since 2023 when he took over, he went 4-3, had some really nice games against Jacksonville, against Minnesota. And who does he get to play in his first 2 times now that Joe Burrow started again? Jacksonville, Minnesota. He's earned the right to play, to be the starter. Rich Eisen went on his show yesterday. I love Rich Eisen, one of the best in the biz. And he said that Jake Browning is better than a third of the quarterbacks in the league, starting quarterbacks in the league. That he's a top 20 quarterback, something along. He's better than every backup. He's the best backup in the league. I'm okay with saying that Jake Browning's the best backup in the league. I'm cool. He's been fantastic. I tried to do the Jake Browning is a top 20 quarterback in the league yesterday to my friends. I started naming every single team and their starting quarterback, and even being as lenient as I possibly could. I got like 6 teams. There's like 6 quarterbacks, starting quarterbacks that are that Jake Browning is definitely better than. I couldn't get to top 20. I tried my hardest. You really got to fudge the numbers. You really got to be like, I think Jake Browning is better than a Trevor Lawrence. And to Jake Browning's credit, he's 2-0 against Trevor Lawrence. But Jake Browning is the best or one of the best backups in the league. When you have a backup quarterback, all you ask from him is to keep your season afloat. Win about half the games and don't tank the season for however long your quarterback's out. I would say that if you ever lose your starting quarterback, you put yourself in a terrible predicament anyways. Like if he's gone for the year, we know that if Joe Burrow isn't actually going to come back for a playoff run or come back at the end of December, then what's it all for anyways? And I know that's where a bunch of you guys are at right now. It's what is this for anyways if Joe's not healthy? And like I said, it's the most optimistic viewpoint on Joe's injury is that he comes back in the middle of December. So that's where I'm going to keep hoping that we get. So can Jake Browning win enough games? Can Jake Browning go 500 or 5-7 over the next 12 weeks to keep this season afloat? And like I said, Mike White is about where I expected, and I'm actually pretty happy with the signing in all sincerity. I think Mike White will be our backup quarterback. That if Jake Browning, gets hit too hard, we got to put somebody else in there. I'm comfortable with Mike White taking snaps. I'm comfortable with Mike White playing a game or two. If we win on Sunday against a backup quarterback and Carson Wentz, and I've got a theory on that I'll talk about later, about what the Minnesota Vikings are doing. If we win on Sunday and we're 3-0, going to Denver on Monday Night Football the following week with a chance to go 4-0, and you put yourself in a great position to make the postseason, you win that game, 4-0. And then Jake Browning goes down. Yes, we're having a much different conversation about what we do at the quarterback position going forward. You're 3-0, you're 3-1, 4-1, whatever it is, to where you are in a prime position to make the postseason, and then Jake Browning gets an injury. Then you go start calling around and be like, all right, we need a starting quarterback from other teams. And whether that looks like a Jameis Winston from New York that, speculated. Malik Willis, I don't know about that. I think Malik Willis is he's shown in a system that isn't LaFleur's, Coach LaFleur's of the Green Bay Packers, that he hasn't been that good of a quarterback. So we'll see. I mean, I'm not too high on him. But like a Joe Flacco even from Cleveland. I don't know if Cleveland would trade their starting quarterback, but they got about 12 of them. So I feel like they can be without their 42-year-old starter, and we can give them a 5th-round pick or something along those lines. Kirk Cousins, that would require a little more capital, but that's a problem for another day. For right now, Jake Browning is going to get starts, and he's earned those starts. We're never going to bring somebody in to start over them. And to be honest, if we were going to bring somebody in that has some cachet, has some name value to it, it'd kind of turn into a circus if Jake Browning would kind of start playing bad, throws a pick. Let's get Jameis in there. Let's have some fun with Jameis Winston. That's not what you want. You want to keep things as in control, especially if you're head coach Zac Taylor, especially if you're Duke Tobin. You want to be as in control of the narrative around your team as you possibly can in this circumstance. You can't let it get out of control to like, man, we should really start playing this other guy. No, Jake Browning's going to be the starter. He's earned that right. Can you win you some games? Can you win on Sunday? They are field goal underdogs against a backup quarterback in Carson Wentz. In Minnesota, a tough place to play. Can he get it done on Sunday? We'll see. We'll see. I saw some people, and this is the final point I make. A guy in this city suggested that the Bengals should go and call Tom Brady. And what a silly precedent that is. The fact that you think that Tom Brady would leave a $40 million cushiony job as a broadcaster for Fox and would forfeit his ownership stake in the Las Vegas Raiders. That's, to me, just a little silly. But, all right, next thing I want to talk about is the Cincinnati Bengals. And throughout my life, in the internet era, throughout my life as a Cincinnati Bengals fan, we've always had pretty good quarterback play. I took over as a fan right about 2002. Starting quarterback at that time was John Kitna, now the Lakota East head football coach. But John Kitna was the starting quarterback. And then you get Carson Palmer. First overall pick. Bengals go 2-14 to get Carson Palmer. He sits behind Kitna for a year and he starts. And I remember being a kid, about 2005, 2006. And we had a subscription to Sports Illustrated for Kids. And you open up the pages, and they're doing quarterback rankings before the year. They're like, these are the tiers of the quarterbacks. And I don't remember how it went at all. I don't remember who was number 9, who was 16. I don't remember it all. I do remember who was top 3 in their own tier of elite quarterbacks. Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, and our very own Carson Palmer. And as a kid who played a lot of Madden, I could not believe that our quarterback, the Bengals quarterback, was considered the elite guy. Carson Palmer has, an up and down career with the Bengals, obviously had a messy breakup. Then you get Andy Dalton, who, I still am a big Andy Dalton fan. There isn't a better guy in the sport, I'd say. Everyone that you can make fun of his pregame speeches, it's pretty clear that Andy Dalton's a fantastic human being. And he was a pretty good quarterback. Went to 5 consecutive playoffs for the Bengals. Did he win any of those games? No, he did not. But he did that. And then you get Joe Burrow, and obviously Joe Burrow goes to the Super Bowl and is probably the best quarterback this franchise has ever seen. Stone, if you can go ahead and throw this graphic up of just kind of the history of quarterback play. And this comes from Joe Goodberry, and I'll read it out. We've had the worst QB injury luck over the last 20 years. Carson Palmer gets his knee blown out in the playoffs against Pittsburgh, tears his UCL. Andy Dalton breaks his thumb as the Bengals were undefeated or looked like the best team in the league. Andy Dalton was on an MVP. Joe Burrow gets hurt 3 different times. Obviously, the left knee, the minor calf or major calf injury, falls on his wrist, and then the injury to his toe. And Joe Goodberry, and we can bring it on back, said we've had the worst quarterback luck. I don't think that's luck. That is general front office incompetence. There's been few teams that have had a better string of good quarterback play than the Cincinnati Bengals in the last 40 years. I mean, you can go to the 49ers that went from Montana to Steve Young to Jeff Garcia. You can go to the Green Bay Packers that went from Favre to Rodgers to Jordan Love right now. You can even go to the Chargers, who went from Drew Brees to Phillip Rivers to Justin Herbert. Are the Bengals on the same tier as them? No, they're not. But going from Carson Palmer to Andy Dalton to Joe Burrow is something that should be lauded. Not many other teams have been able to do that. And the constant is that these guys go down at some point with a major injury at an inopportune time. 3 separate quarterbacks. And the only one that we've gotten the situation right around was Andy Dalton, who unfortunately was the least talented of those 3. If Joe Burrow had the team that Andy Dalton had, we wouldn't be dealing with this per se. If Carson Palmer had the team built around him that Andy Dalton had, he probably wouldn't have asked to get out of the whole situation and had the messy breakup. So 3 good quarterbacks, franchise quarterbacks, and we've only gotten the situation done right once. Unfortunately, it was with the least talented of the bunch. And there's this misnomer, I think, going around about the Bengals and who's to blame and everything like this, about how the Bengals, you watch national commentators on this, the Colin Cowherds, the Rich Eisens, the Dan Patricks, whoever, and they keep saying the same thing over and over again. The Bengals are cheap and unwilling to commit the resources towards protecting Joe Burrow. And I think that's wrong. I don't think it's necessarily that they weren't trying. And maybe it's worse. I said this yesterday. It might be worse that they have tried. They have made efforts to protect Joe Burrow. And they just stunk. They just whiffed. It's becoming clear that we can't do this again. The Joe Burrow situation is what it is at this point. It just is what it is. He's a banged up quarterback. The line can't get it right, and I think that Joe has a part to play in this. But whenever the Joe Burrow era is done here in Cincinnati, if we still have the same guys at the helm of the front office, the Duke Tobins, the understaffed front office, and we do this again and we get another good quarterback, doesn't have to be great like Joe Burrow, doesn't have to be great like Carson Palmer, he can just be good like Andy Dalton. And we don't do what's necessary. We aren't competent enough to put the proper pieces around him to flourish, to stay healthy, to continue to be on the field. Then what are we doing? I cannot do it again. I cannot see another quarterback come through this program, this franchise, and get hurt the way that Carson Palmer did, the way that Joe Burrow did, and to a lesser extent, the way that Andy Dalton did. So another thing that I wanted to bring up, and I talked about this yesterday. We thank you so much for being here. Make sure to give us a like. We have a big watch along this Sunday at Smoke Justice down there in Covington, Kentucky. So we're going to be cheering on Jake the Snake Brown. We're all going to be hissing for Jake the Snake Browning as he takes on Carson Wentz and Kevin O'Connell, who, if they started a NFL head coach basketball team, Kevin O'Connell's got to be your center. He's got to be. I mean, that dude's tall as heck. But we'll have a big watch along. They will be giving away a Joe Burrow jersey. So be sure to get on down there. We'll be down there. I said yesterday, first 5 that show up, get a free old fashioned on me. Great bourbon selection there in the bourbon bar, but that's where we'll be on this Sunday. Be there. Looking forward to it. But I made a comment yesterday about when I was talking about Joe Burrow and how he, I think, is undeniably responsible for some of the blame. I don't know how the pie chart breaks up, that if it's the front office, if it's head coach, if it's the offensive line play, or if it's Joe. He deserves some of the blame for 2 parts, both the way in which he plays and continually extending plays, continually trying to make the most out of everything. And we've seen him have heroic plays time after time. Or the fact that, his body has been put through the ringer, and he's not built like Josh Allen. He's not 6'5", 260 pounds to where he can take a beating. He's a little more slight. He deserves some of the blame. But I said yesterday that Joe Burrow, when he comes back, is not going to look like himself. is not going to look like himself. He is going to probably not extend the plays as much as he had in years past. Is it going to look like a full-blown 42-year-old Tom Brady where he's just getting rid of it as quick as possible? He gets some pressure, he throws it away. No, it's not that. But I thought that we'd see a little less heroics from Joe Burrow. Maybe we will, but Zac Taylor was asked by Paul Dehner, and this is a really good question from Paul Dehner. So here's the clip from the interview yesterday from Zac Taylor talking about this very specific topic.
When you think about this injury happening to Joe and another injury you guys are dealing with, it, you have to organizationally start to rethink how you protect Joe and the way that you guys have gone about that.
It's unfortunate that this happened. But again, that's part of football, and that's what's going to happen. Guys are in the pocket, guys are moving around. I don't know how a turf toe injury fully happens, how you got to get hit or stepped on. I know that potentially he could have been clean for 99% of the game, and the one play is where this happens. And so I get it. I understand where people are going to come from. It's going to be very attacking of us and our style of play. That's got us to a Super Bowl and an AFC championship and 2 division titles and won a lot of games for us. So we're always evaluating how we can protect our players and put them in the best position possible. So I take accountability for that. And if people want to blame me for putting them in a position, I'm fine taking that. But we'll continue to put the best plan forward to put Jake in a great position to go help us beat Minnesota.
So in any part of life, Zac Taylor's saying that right there, that, that's how he plays. That's how the Bengals have played, and it's been successful in their history. That the extendability, that his playmaking ability is what makes Joe Burrow great, is what led to the Bengals making the Super Bowl, making an AFC championship game, and won a lot of games here in Cincinnati. And he's absolutely right. In life, a little self-diagnostic check is as important than pretty much anything. You've got to understand where you are. You've got to be able to look yourself in the mirror and say, all right, what am I good at? Where do I exceed? Where do I excel? And what am I bad at? Where am I terrible? I've done this time and time again working here, both on the content side of Chatterbox, on the broadcast side of Chatterbox, on just the general as an employee. What am I good at? And about a lot of the time, it's I show up, I work hard every day. Like I will give you my time, I will give you my effort and energy. But I'll be honest. My attention to detail oftentimes is lacking. They ask you that on every job application. Well, what's your attention to detail? If I'm being an honest man, it's not very good. I tell my wife this. We've been renovating our house now for 3 years. And I'm willing to show up every day. I'm willing to work on the projects, watch the YouTube videos. I was not a handyman at all. I'm still not that handy, but I'm certainly miles ahead now than where I was in 2022 in terms of handiness. I'll try, but, maybe the caulking isn't as clean as it should be. Maybe there's a streak in the paint. This thing, just the screw is a little loose. Stuff like that. And Zac Taylor is looking at his team and he goes, listen, Joe Burrow as a player, maybe his greatest strength, perhaps his greatest strength, is his ability to extend the play. Is his ability to make something out of nothing. The pocket's collapsing. He buys himself more time and can throw on the run. The only thing that even comes close to rivaling that ability for Joe Burrow is his accuracy, which is otherworldly. But his ability to extend the play. We talk about the great quarterbacks in the league, and he's not as athletic as Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen. He's not even as athletic as Patrick Mahomes, but he can extend plays, and that's what we're seeing at elite playmakers, is their ability to make something out of nothing. Now, the weakness on Joe is that sometimes those extended plays, he takes sacks. He takes more sacks than he should, and he's gone on record saying that. He doesn't mind taking a sack on a 3rd and 10 because, hey, you're going to punt it anyways, so why throw the ball away? We'll lose 6-7 yards and punt it away. He's not afraid to take a sack there. He's gone on record saying that, and that's the right way of looking at things. But, Joe Burrow takes some sacks, and oftentimes when you extend the plays, you take a big hit from a big man. And that's where we've seen the injuries come over time and time again. So when Joe comes back, whether it be in December or heaven forbid the start of next year, they're going to have to look themselves in the mirror and go, all right, is it worth losing a little bit of this escapability? Is it worth losing a little bit of your playmaking ability to protect you onto the field? I said it yesterday, I'm willing to work with 85% of Joe Burrow. But Zac is right in saying that the reason that the Bengals have won a lot of games over the years is because Joe is Joe. And are you going to take away what makes Joe so great? I don't know. I don't know that answer. It's gonna be interesting to see, no doubt about it. Can I see a hybrid where, hey, Joe, you got free reign to make something happen late in the games, late in the halves, but early in the first quarter, early in the third quarter, let's just play a little more conservatively? Is there common ground here? We will see. So, Stone, we're here at the halfway point. Haven't brought you in all too much. Thoughts on the Mike White signing and the Sean Clifford signing?
Yeah, I mean, we'll take it right at this point. Obviously, it was only a matter of time before they brought somebody else in. We talked about that at length yesterday, and we threw around some names that were, a little bit more entertaining than others. But as you alluded to, there was no chance that Cincinnati would bring in a guy like Jameis Winston. Kirk Cousins with the contract, he's owed $27 million this year. That wouldn't have made any sense in the world. You're just looking for someone that is a competent backup to Jake Browning, and perhaps somebody that could potentially challenge him if he were to struggle over the course of the next 3 to 4 weeks as the Bengals starting quarterback. I think you're going to see him have a pretty long leash when it comes to him being the starter for the Cincinnati Bengals football team. But, if the Bengals lose their next 3 or 4 games and Mike White is learning the system well and, Zac Taylor has confidence in him, maybe you see him make the switch. But at the end of the day, if the Bengals have to go to a different quarterback besides Jake Browning that isn't Joe Burrow, the season's probably over. That's just kind of the reality of the situation here. So, bringing in 2 guys, they fill out that quarterback room a little bit. You feel better, obviously, that, Brett Rippon probably, at some point is going to get unseated as the backup to Jake Browning. You bring in guys that have played a lot of football. Obviously, the Cincinnati connection with Sean Clifford, and as you alluded to, Mike White has played good football in the National Football League as a backup. He is now a Cincinnati Bengal, and I think that's certainly promising for this team.
Do you think that So I said earlier in the show, I talked about how I thought it was always, a guy like Mike White, and you could throw out a dozen names, guys like Mike White that have, played. I don't know where Aiden O'Connell is, but a guy like that has started games and understands how to be an NFL quarterback, though his ceiling's very, very low. If the Bengals win 2 games in a row, let's say they rattle off a win here in Minnesota and they go to Denver and they're 4-0, and then Jake Browning takes he gets hurt for whatever reason. Am I crazy for thinking then, and I was just very hard on Bengals fans that were suggesting that they go get a Kirk Cousins or a Jameis Winston. Am I crazy for thinking that then you go, all right, we're 4-0, we've got to get someone that can win us games in the meantime, like a Kirk Cousins, like a Jameis Winston that has played serious time? Am I crazy for thinking that? Do you think that's a reality?
I don't think you're crazy at all. I do think that you're probably not going to get a Baker Mayfield situation where you bring a guy in and he can play the next day. If you're going to make a signing, I think you want at least a week or 2, probably 2 weeks before you feel comfortable throwing him out there as the guy. So, if something were to happen to Browning and then you bring a guy in, is he ready to go for you right away? And is he going to be a better option than somebody like Mike White or Sean Clifford? I don't know. But within the building, there has to be. I understand it's a toe injury. I understand it's, borderline unprecedented. But with the people in the building, there has to be a feel for where Joe Burrow could potentially return, right? They're not going to tell us, right? Zac Taylor, he didn't even address it whatsoever, and I don't blame him whatsoever for kind of, doing it and handling it that way. But if they truly believe that there is a chance that Joe Burrow can come back this year, I think you will see them be aggressive if something were like that to happen with a Jake Browning injury, because you can't afford to punt on the season. Right?
Yeah, if you're in a good spot, no doubt.
You can't afford to do it. You have too much talent on this team. You went out and you gave Trey Hendrickson a raise. You paid T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, and you have a 2-0 record right now. So just because your quarterback is gone, it hurts to say. I think Zac Taylor probably was being a little bit too overly optimistic. But, I can't fault him for that. What's he supposed to do? Go up there and say, yeah, we're 2-0, but we're cooked. We lost the best player in the NFL. No, he's got to spin it in a positive light. But, if something were to happen to Jake Browning, I think at that point you're probably in a situation where if you lose your quarterback and you lose your backup as well, you don't have too many Ohio State stories in the NFL where you're on a third-string guy and you can still have tremendous success in the postseason. So fingers crossed Browning is okay and he can play up to snuff as well.
Yeah, I think I'm right there with you. All right, so this Sunday the Bengals take on the Minnesota Vikings. Once again, we'll be down at Smoke Justice, a live watch along. It'll be a lot of fun. We can sing the song together, hopefully a lot, and just watch a Bengals game together. Come on down. They are giving away a Joe Burrow jersey, so hope to see a lot of you guys there. Hope to see pretty much everyone that's in the chat right now there on Sunday, because I love hanging out with you guys. Hopefully the feeling is mutual. So news came out yesterday, and we will get to my power rankings here in a few moments, but news came out yesterday that the team of the Bengals play this Sunday, the Minnesota Vikings, are going to not have their starting quarterback. They're not going to have their they have a running back by committee. They're not going to have Aaron Jones. They're not going to have, I believe Ryan Kelly is also out, their starting center. But the big news was obviously J.J. McCarthy is out, high ankle sprain or low ankle sprain. He's got a sprain on that ankle. And he's going to miss a few games. Their backup is Carson Wentz, former first overall pick? Yeah, first or second overall pick. And, obviously had a lot of success in Philadelphia before his career kind of got derailed after an injury. And I'm not a conspiracy guy. In fact, my wife last night was asking about different conspiracies, things that are going on in the world. And I told her, the problem with starting to believe in some conspiracies is that you believe in all of them. You go like, well, something's not right there, and I just don't like going down that path. Obviously, some are there. I do have a conspiracy on the Minnesota Vikings and their starting quarterback, J.J. McCarthy. And it goes like this. We see this in the MLB all the time. We don't see this per se in the NFL all that much. But am I crazy for thinking, based off the way that J.J. McCarthy has played through his first two games, that Kevin O'Connell looked at him, and I didn't see any tape that looked like JJ was hobbled or banged up? Am I crazy for thinking that Kevin O'Connell, who I think is one of the better offensive minds, one of the better head coaches in the league, looked at his starting quarterback, who he has faith in, who, I'll be honest, I watched both of his first two games. He played terrible for 7 of his 8 quarters. But I did see what Kevin O'Connell and the Vikings saw. I saw good arm strength. I saw some athleticism. I saw some accuracy at times. But it was few and far between. I saw the talent, I guess is what I'm saying. But the overall consistent play wasn't there. Is it crazy for me to think that Kevin O'Connell looked at JJ and said, hey, here's what we're going to do. We got a game this week against the Cincinnati Bengals. They're on their backup quarterback. We're then going to go overseas for the next 2 weeks. What I want you to do, you're obviously too amped up. You're obviously playing way too fast. You weren't comfortable. We are going to give you a breather of about 3 weeks. When we come back from overseas, you're going to be our starter. You're still our guy. We believe in you. But we want to get you a little more learning. We want you to settle down and be cool so that when you come back in 3 weeks, you're ready to play. That's what I think is going on. I think my conspiracy is that I don't think J.J. McCarthy is actually hurt. And as a Bengals fan, maybe we wanted, based off the way that J.J. McCarthy has played through 7 of his first 8 quarters, maybe we wanted J.J. McCarthy to play and not Carson Wentz, who at one point looked like one of the better quarterbacks in the league in his career. And he's only 32, which might surprise you guys. Am I crazy for thinking that? I don't know. I don't know. Stone, what do you think? You think I'm putting on a tinfoil hat, or do you think that is something justified in the way that JJ's played? That Kevin's like, hey, we're going to give you a three-week reset. You're going to be our guy in 3 weeks, but be ready to go. We're just going to give you a breather because you're currently too amped up and you're just not playing well.
I completely agree with you. You brought it up last night before, one of the coaches' shows that we were working last night with Hamilton and Baden, and I think you totally hit the nail on the head there. I mean, when you look at how McCarthy played over the course of these last 2 games, like, it was bad, and it was really, really bad. The only thing actually that I would push back on a little bit with your take is I don't know if I'm seeing first round talent. Has he made a couple of good throws? Sure, maybe. But when he was at Michigan, it was a lot of under center stuff. His back to the defense, turn around, handing the ball off, simple reads, easy completions. And you could see O'Connell trying to get him some of that same work here in Minnesota, which really doesn't align with what Kevin O'Connell likes to do offensively. So, when the news broke, honestly, as a Bengals fan, I was sitting there kind of saying, well, I kind of rather would play J.J. McCarthy, to be completely honest with you, than Carson Wentz. Wentz obviously hasn't been a starter in years, but, we've seen veterans have great success in Kevin O'Connell's offense. And honestly, for the short term, I think this Minnesota offense is actually going to get a little bit better without McCarthy. But I agree. I didn't even realize till you made the point that they've got 2 international games these next 2 weeks. That gives them a chance to kind of go overseas, have not many people, really talking about him. Just go with Carson Wentz, give him a couple of weeks to kind of get his mind right, and then come back in a few weeks and be the starter and try things over again. But I completely agree with your take.
Yeah, it's they'll never tell us. We'll never know. It's all speculation, but that's just kind of where I thought. And for those that think that that's a crazy thing to suggest, and I don't know if any of you think that it's crazy to suggest, but we saw last year the Carolina Panthers bench Bryce Young for 3 to 4 weeks to let Andy Dalton play, and everyone's like, what the heck are you doing? And then Bryce Young comes back, and he played well at the end of the year. Now, a lot of it was in garbage time, but he gave you reason to believe, and it was clear that Dave Canellis and the Panthers saw that, hey, you just needed a rest. Like, there's no use in playing as frazzled as you play right now. And it's a hard line to tiptoe, to be like, we have confidence in you. Don't believe that we don't have confidence in you, but you're just not yourself right now. We need you to just take a back seat for a few weeks. We'll bring you back. We'll get you ready to play. All right, Cincinnati Bengals. I said that maybe we wanted J.J. McCarthy to play anyways. It was a 4.5-point spread this Sunday. Now I believe it's a 2.5-point spread. So Vegas seems to think the Vikings are better with J.J. McCarthy than Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz looked absolutely atrocious backing up Patrick Mahomes last year in that Week 17 game. Remember the game that we needed the Chiefs, and they played their entire third string against the Broncos, which obviously ended any prayer that the Bengals have of making the postseason. We're through 2 weeks in the National Football League, so we get a chance. Are you doing power rankings on your show later today too? Or are we just doubling down on power rankings here in the 10 to 12?
Not today. I'll do mine tomorrow.
Okay. So did I ruin your show plan?
No, not at all. Not at all. All you. We probably should space it out, not do hit him with 2 in one day.
He said no, you didn't ruin my show plan. But maybe we should space it out. So I think I did ruin his show plan, which I think also the Mike White signing.
That ruined the show plan for sure.
Yeah, no doubt about it, because I had 20 minutes of rips, takes to rip off before that signing. But without further ado, this is my Week 2 Power Rankings. Coming in at number 10, we have the San Francisco 49ers. Now, I'm not a guy that likes to look back at takes, but I do want for everyone, I used to bash on Brock Purdy when you guys were telling me he was a top 5, top 6 quarterback in the league, and I think Brock Purdy's a good quarterback. But what does it say about the San Francisco 49ers that Mac Jones comes in and looks about as good as Brock Purdy and plays the best game of his career under Kyle Shanahan? It's pretty clear that that's just a really good roster. Kyle Shanahan's a really good offensive coach, that he doesn't need great quarterback play to win games. So I have the San Francisco 49ers coming in at number 10. I think they look better than a lot of people might have anticipated coming into the year. Coming in at number 9. Detroit Lions. I didn't have them in my top 10 last week. I didn't have them. I think this is a team that I don't think preseason anybody had wilder splits on where they thought the Detroit Lions were going to be. People that were high on the Lions still said this is a Super Bowl contender. People that were low on the Lions saying, hey, you lost both of your coordinators. It's not looking good. That's a tough thing to overcome. Said this team's not going to make the postseason. They did just absolutely demolish the Chicago Bears, who probably are a dumpster fire at this point. We will see what happens with that. But the Detroit Lions are still just a really, really sound roster. Even with new coordinators, I still think they're a playoff team. I still think that NFC North is probably the most competitive division in football. And the Lions are still just very, very good. Coming in at number 8, Washington. So Washington looked really slow last week. They're the oldest team in the National Football League. I know they've got a young quarterback, but they are the oldest team in the National Football League, and they just played a much superior team in the Green Bay Packers. And I still think that the Commanders, I think they could be a better team this year than they were last year. Last year they made the NFC Championship game. I don't know if they'll make it there, but as a team, you look at their body of work throughout the year. Now they're playing a first-place schedule. I still think they could be a very sound team. I think they're the 8th best team in the National Football League. I think Jaden Daniels is probably the 4th best quarterback in the league now that Joe Burrow's out. Coming in number 7, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Man, oh man. Talk about a quarterback that throughout my history watching the NFL that I have completely 180'd on. And for good reason. Baker Mayfield, when he played for the Browns, might have been my least favorite guy in the league. Cocky, arrogant, and I just didn't think that the play showed up. And it was probably because he was playing for the Cleveland Browns, and I just don't like the Cleveland Browns. And he goes to Tampa Bay and kind of he's just a gamer, man. That run at the end of the game, it's hard not to get excited about this. And I'll tell you what, Tampa Bay's front office deserves more credit. I don't think they get nearly enough credit. They've consistently had a really good roster, skilled players on the line. That's a really good team. And Tampa Bay starting out 2-0 and looking really, really good this season. Coming in at number 6, the Los Angeles Rams. And the reason that I have the Los Angeles Rams here in number 6 is because I think Sean McVay is the second best coach in the league. Maybe the best coach in the league. Him or Andy Reid. On any given week, they can pretty much beat anybody. They can't beat anybody. When everyone's healthy, they are as good as it gets in the league. But there is a consistency problem with the Los Angeles Rams. It seems that they kind of have an NBA feel to them where they're just trying to get in the postseason, and then they'll give you everything they got in the postseason. Los Angeles Rams at number 6. Coming to number 5. Man, I'll tell you what, Jim Harbaugh deserves all the kudos he ever gets. That dude, no matter where he goes, just wins football games. He takes over Stanford, which was a dumpster fire. They win immediately. He takes over the San Francisco 49ers, which was a dumpster fire. They go to the NFC Championship back-to-back, go to a Super Bowl. He's just Michigan, winner. Here now for the Chargers, a winner. They get another win last night. Justin Herbert's a great quarterback. We got to see it in the postseason, but man, he's a great quarterback. Herbert and Jim Harbaugh, they're going to win a lot of games from years to come. Coming in number 4, the Buffalo Bills. Josh Allen is the best football player in the league right now. He is. Point blank. They ask him to do so much. They are fantastic. James Cook, I said this in the chat yesterday during the Stone Shield show. James Cook is about as free of – I feel like I'm getting fooled on the DraftKings and the FanDuels of the world because his bet to score a touchdown is about 130 every single week, and he scores every single week, 17 of the last 20. So there's the cheat code. Just bet James Cook to score an anytime touchdown. The Buffalo Bills coming in number 4. Coming in number 3, the Philadelphia Eagles. A lot of people would have them at number 1, and I really don't care how you break up this top 3. But the Philadelphia Eagles win again. They've got a sound rosters in. They beat the Kansas City Chiefs in Arrowhead, and that's a big win. But the Philadelphia Eagles, the reigning Super Bowl champs, man, oh man, I don't know how you beat them. I just haven't been as impressed with them through the first 2 weeks as I have been with these top 2 teams. Coming in number 2. The Green Bay Packers. I think they're the best team in the NFC. I think they're one piece away with Micah Parsons. If we did this like college football, if we did power rankings, which I guess is what we're doing, where you just rate the wins. If you look at the team as wins, who has better wins than the Green Bay Packers right now? Nobody. The answer is absolutely nobody. They beat the Lions sure-handedly. They beat 2 of these top 10 teams in the Commanders and the Lions, and those 2 teams didn't even look like they could compete with the Green Bay Packers on that day. The Green Bay Packers, if Jordan Love plays to where he played 2 years ago, are probably the best team in the league. But at number 1, I like what I see from the Baltimore Ravens more. And you can laugh at this. I know they lost to the Bills. I know they lost to the Bills in week 1. But go back and think about that game. The Ravens looked better than the Bills. And you can go back and look at the postseason game that they just played against the Bills, that they lost that one too. They dominated both those games. They just lost. That happens in the NFL sometimes. The teams that have impressed me most in the NFL by far, by a significant margin, are the Baltimore Ravens and the Green Bay Packers. You can laugh at me putting the Baltimore Ravens that already have a loss at number one all you want. No one has impressed me more. Stone, do you notice a team that isn't in that top 10?
Cincinnati Bengals.
Cincinnati Bengals. Do you notice another AFC team?
Kansas City Chiefs.
Kansas City Chiefs are not in the top 10. Kansas City Chiefs will be fine. They will be. They'll probably win a playoff game. They'll be fine. But right now I can't put them at top 10 because I've seen, even though Patrick Mahomes, who I thought has looked really good, I think he's looked really good through 2 weeks. Obviously, they lost those 2 weeks. They seem slow. They're obviously comfortable winning or playing those sloppy games. And they've lost to 2 good teams. They've lost to the Chargers. They've lost to the Eagles. But, man, I just something's a little off right now. And I think they'll be fine come season's end. But right now I can't put them in my top 10. I just can't do it. Any criticisms of my top 10, Stone?
I think overall it's a solid list, but we got some issues there at the top, as we talked about last week. For me personally, last week I had Philly at 1, Green Bay at 2, and I said I need to see a little bit more from Green Bay and maybe a little bit less from Philly before I make that switch. And I'm ready to put Green Bay at 1 over Philadelphia. Yeah, Philadelphia does all the right things. They're winning, but offensively, they've been a little stuck in the mud through a couple of weeks. Again, they've done enough to win. They just beat Kansas City. They deserve a lot of credit for that. They're still a really, really good football team. But I saw enough from Green Bay on Thursday night against the Washington Commanders to leapfrog Philadelphia. So I would have them at 1, and then I would have Philadelphia at 2. And then I probably would flip the LA teams. I think the Rams have impressed me a little bit more than the Chargers. I'll be completely honest, didn't stay up for the entirety of the game last night for the Chargers. But with Matthew Stafford moving around, and obviously there's the question marks with the back, but if he's all right and he's going to be able to play throughout the entirety of the season, the Rams are a legitimate Super Bowl contender.
Who has, through 2 weeks, who has impressed you? Like, who has shifted your opinion on the team the most in a positive light? Is it Green Bay?
Now, I was pretty bullish on Green Bay coming in, even without Micah Parsons, and then you make that acquisition, and it's like, oh, it's really go time if you're the Green Bay Packers. I'm not going to say this team is going to make the playoffs. I'm not going to get out of pocket and say that. But how can you not be impressed with the Indianapolis Colts?
Yeah,
Daniel
no doubt
Jones?
about it.
You have to be. I mean, he looks like a completely different quarterback. He's making plays. Lou Anarumo, right? We all had belief that he could be a great defensive coordinator. He was for lots of years here in Cincinnati. They just needed a shift in philosophy and a new leader, really, for their defense, especially with a really young defense. But I'm not surprised at all. Anarumo landed on his feet, and he's doing a terrific job in Indianapolis. Steichen, he can dial it up with the best of them, but he was dealing with Anthony Richardson, who is flat-out incompetent. Now he has a veteran guy who needed that change of scenery. No pressure really on Daniel Jones coming into this season. And again, I'm not going to sit here and say Indianapolis is going to make the playoffs, but how can you not be impressed with how they started and beating a really good Denver team with a really good defense as well?
I don't know what the preseason odds were in the AFC South, but I'd be willing to bet that the Texans were pretty heavy favorites. I'm not saying like minus 1,000 or anything like that, but probably like minus 300, 400. Like they would probably be pretty heavy favorites. They have started 0-2, Colts 2-0, Jacksonville's 1-1, should probably be 2-0. Has Houston surprised you in their 0-2 start?
Yeah, I thought offensively they were going to take a step in the right direction. Last year it was really hard for C.J. Stroud. That offensive line was one of the worst in football. They made some adjustments there. It's a really good defense under DeMeco Ryans, but C.J. Stroud seemingly has regressed a little bit. He had that unbelievable rookie season, and then I was kind of cutting him some slack because how bad his offensive line was last year, but he did not play well in the game last night. They were not moving the ball up and down the field effectively at all, and now I think you have to look at Jacksonville as a potential team that can compete with Houston at the top of the AFC South, along with, of course, Indianapolis as well. But, Jacksonville, to me, they've made a lot of improvement. I'm a believer in Liam Cohen. Some of the stuff he dialed up was really impressive. He had guys open, granted against a subpar Bengals defense, but a lot of operational mistakes for Jacksonville, a lot of procedural stuff, right? Illegal shifts, false starts, just kind of shooting themselves in the foot, a couple of silly turnovers as well. So if they can cut back on that, it very well could be a 3-horse race in the AFC South with the Jaguars, the Colts, and the Houston Texans.
I'm trying to pull up what it looks like to win the division in the AFC right now, AFC South. AFC South currently has the Colts at plus 130, Jags at plus 225, and Texans at plus 230. Here in the AFC North, they actually have where are we at here? I imagine that, are they not even given? No, they're giving the Baltimore Ravens minus 425. Feels fitting. Bengals at 8 points. Probably the most surprising one is the NFC West, the other team that kind of has surprised some teams, starting out 2-0, the Arizona Cardinals. You a believer in the Arizona Cardinals?
No, I am not a believer in them whatsoever. Kyler, obviously, he can make some incredible plays, but Gannon, their head coach, not a believer in him. And I think once they start playing, those matchups more within the division, I think it's going to fizzle out a little bit. Don't anticipate them having any success against San Francisco or Los Angeles, and really Seattle either. I was impressed with the Seattle this past week against Pittsburgh, and I think they're a threat in that division. But hot start for Arizona, got to give them credit for that. But I think once the season wraps up, they'll probably be towards the basement of that division.
Well, I hope so, because I have when I put on my Bengals glasses and try to figure out a way to get the Bengals into the postseason and a Joe Burrow healthy, I just go ahead and count that Arizona Cardinals win at the end of the season, and they keep winning. That's going to look tougher and tougher. But regardless, that's a tale for another time. Yeah, I think it's gonna. There's some interesting storylines around. Keep getting the question. From Casey McAllister. Where do you have the Bengals, and how many more wins till they need to make it top 10? I will not put them top 10 if they win on Sunday. I will not put them top 10 if they beat a backup quarterback in Carson Wentz, simply because they probably should have lost the first 2 games. They won, and that's all that matters. I've said that many a times. But in power rankings, when you're trying to gauge how good a team is, it kind of matters how you look. And if they win on Sunday, that's great. It would take them beating the Broncos at starting 4 now. They'd have to beat the Vikings and going to Minnesota, going to Denver, starting off 4-0. Starting off 4-0, 3 wins on the road, 3 wins with a backup quarterback. You'd have to put them top 10. Probably right at 10 or 9, nothing higher. But there's just too many teams in the NFL right now that have a much better odds. I saw yesterday our odds to make the postseason went from like minus 155 to plus 250. I don't know. You got to go 8 and 7 the rest of the way. 8 and 7 the rest of the way. Easy scheduling on the back end. It's not all that too tough. Another team here in Cincinnati is trying to make the postseason, and it's the Cincinnati Reds. They got a win last night. The Reds, I think they are currently 2 games back. I'm pulling it up right now. 2 games back of the wild card, but obviously it's not just them in that current situation. You've got the Mets still holding fast on that final wild card spot there, a game and a half up on the Arizona Diamondbacks, who have come out of nowhere. And the Cincinnati Reds and the San Francisco Giants, both 2 games out. I think you can go ahead and consider the St. Louis Cardinals at 4.5. They're pretty much done. But the Reds, they're still right there, man. They're still right there. I believe the Mets are playing the Padres starting tonight. Yeah, they start tonight playing the Padres. So tough series. But man, it'd be a fun fall if somehow the Reds can just backdoor their way into it. The Mets don't want to play in the postseason, apparently. They just don't want to do it. They keep losing games. I know they've ripped off a win. I think it was on Sunday. They finally won one. But the Mets and their $1 million, $1 billion payrolls, nothing would make me happier. And this is a positive for you Reds fans as well. Nothing would make me happier than the Reds getting that final playoff spot over the Mets. Then they'd have to play the Los Angeles Dodgers in a 3-game series in Chavez Ravine down at Dodger Stadium. And then the Reds win that series. The Reds would be in the NLDS, so you guys would be happy as a clam. I'd be happy because everyone in my life is a Reds fan. Dad, brothers, cousins, friends, they're all Reds fans. But I'd also be happy because a take of mine, which is that money doesn't equal championships. It never has in this league. I know that the Los Angeles Dodgers won it last year. But more often than not, we saw the Yankees throughout our entire lives. If you're of about 30 years old, I'm 29. The Yankees have spent money my entire life. They've got one championship to show for it. The Dodgers have spent money my entire life. They've got 2 championships, one being of a COVID. I mean, they've won a championship, so you can't say it doesn't equal. But baseball has a way of governing itself. It simply has. Always has. And nothing has made the sport more equal than the draft. Before that, players were just signed wherever. That's why the Yankees won 20 of the first 60 World Series, whatever it was. Because, there's this kid from Oklahoma that's a switch hitter that just looks like this all-American boy. He's got blonde hair, handsome kid. He's just smoking balls. Hey, you want to come play for a winner? You want to come play for the Yankees? And that's how they get Mickey Mantle. And that's just what happens. You start winning, you can sign whoever you want. And before the draft, that's how baseball worked. But it'd be interesting for everyone calling for a salary cap and that this sport is going to go into a strike. That the top 2 teams that spend the most money, the New York Mets and the Los Angeles Dodgers, would be taken down by the Cincinnati Reds. It'd be interesting. No doubt about it. Stone Shield Show coming up here in a minute. Thank you so much for being here. Had a lot of fun. Trey should be back tomorrow. I told him, hey, if you need another day, we've got plenty of takes. But thank you so much for showing Off the Bench. Reminder, this Sunday, I want to see you all there. Down there at Smoke Justice, they're giving away a Joe Burrow jersey. A little ill-timed. Maybe they should flip that 9 upside down and make it a 6. And maybe we'll just work with some ad-libs and make it a Mad Gib of a Browning on the back of that jersey. But we'll see you around tomorrow. Off the Bench. Thanks, guys.
All right, here we go. Welcome into the Stone Shield Show here on Tuesday, September 16th. It is a pleasure to have you with us, getting wrapped up here at Off the Bench and transitioning over to the Stone Shield Show. Plenty of stuff to discuss on today's show. Appreciate everyone hanging out in the live chat. And as always, if you aren't able to hang out with us between 11 a.m. to noon, that is all right. That is just fine. We will have podcasts up wherever you get your podcasts later in the day. That'll go up probably 15 minutes after our show concludes around noon. So if you miss some of the live show, that is completely fine. You can catch the podcast there wherever you get your podcasts, and we will have those up as soon as possible. Also, Off the Bench, we will get those podcasts up as soon as possible as well. Reed's done a tremendous job here this week. And we'll see if Trace Fowler makes his return to Off the Bench coming forward the rest of this week. But I was talking to Reed as he was walking out of the studio here. Thought that was a really good show. We were able to introduce some more stuff there, some more graphics. Went through his power rankings. Big shout out to Casey McAllister for coming up with that graphic. Thought that was pretty cool. And we'll have our power rankings here at my show coming your way tomorrow. But many things to discuss. Obviously, lots going on with the Cincinnati Bengals. We talked at length about Joe Burrow yesterday, and I was going to come on here and break down all these potential veteran quarterbacks that Cincinnati could have signed. And for the record, I'm still going to go through a few names. We're not going to spend just as much time on this as we were planning on originally coming in here this morning, because the Bengals, of course, made two signings at the quarterback position to their practice squad. Mike White and, of course, Sean Clifford, who went to St. Xavier High School here in Cincinnati and played with Green Bay for a couple of seasons as well. Two signings to the practice squad for the Cincinnati Bengals at that quarterback position. It's very obvious based on those signings that Jake Browning is the guy and will be the guy going forward until Joe Burrow can come back from injury. Fingers crossed. Hopefully that is something that can happen. But Zac Taylor made that clear, right? There were some people out there, saying, oh, let's get Jameis Winston and have him try to come in as a starter, right? Or let's get Jameis Winston and have him be ready to be Jake Browning's backup. Or let's get Kirk Cousins, pay him $27 million that he's owed, and have him be the starter. All that would be silly, right? The Bengals have done this in the past with Jake Browning, and they're intending on doing it again. And clearly Zac Taylor and clearly the team has a lot of belief and confidence in him as well, and the abilities that he has to lead this football team, even in the absence of course, Joe Burrow. So we're going to be breaking down the quarterback position. Also, lots of people banging on the Bengals offensive line, lots of people banging on the Bengals organization to the surprise of nobody, right? Obviously, after another Joe Burrow injury. That was something that was going to transpire, but multiple things can be true at once. We touched on that a little bit yesterday, but there are several things that can be true as this situation and relates to the Cincinnati Bengals and Joe Burrow. We're going to be breaking that down on today's show. Not a full preview of the Viking game, but as Reed mentioned on Off the Bench, a couple of significant injuries. Do have a take on J.J. McCarthy, and if you stuck around or if you watched Off the Bench, you know exactly what that take is, because Reed Mouse and I completely align on that. Got to give him credit for coming up with that take, but I think he really is on to something. Again, we'll touch on a few of the other veteran guys that Cincinnati could have signed and some of the, aggressive comments or aggressive takes, I guess, that were spewed around yesterday. Also, we'll spend a little bit of time talking about college football here on today's show. Didn't spend any time yesterday talking about that during our hour show. Obviously, lots going on as far as Joe Burrow and Bengals content, so I do want to switch things up a little bit. We'll talk a little bit about Texas A&M and Notre Dame. Is Notre Dame perhaps, are they cooked? They're 0-2, and not a ton of games left on their schedule that are, marquee possible victories, so we'll spend some time talking about that. Baker Mayfield, more fourth quarter late game heroics for him as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were able to take down the Houston Texans on the road. And also, if we have some time at the end of today's show, we're going to touch on the Kansas City Chiefs. They're 0-2. I know a lot of Bengals fans don't want to hear this, but they're going to be just fine. They're definitely going to be a playoff team. And also Cincinnati, the Reds, somehow won last night. We haven't really spent much time talking about them over the past week or so, but kind of going into that A's series over the weekend, last thing I expected was them to get swept, right? I thought, there was a chance maybe they lose the series, pick up one game, but getting swept by the A's certainly wasn't on my bingo card. Maybe that's just my fault for being a little naive, because getting swept by Oakland there, or I guess Sacramento, or whatever you want to say, just the Athletics there, is probably the most Reds thing that could have happened in this situation. But regardless, if we have some time, we'll spend a little bit of time talking about the Cincinnati Reds to close out today's show. But let's start with the news of the morning. Cincinnati signing Mike White, Cincinnati signing Sean Clifford. And I don't have an issue with these signings whatsoever. it was my frame of mind that they should bring in a player kind of the caliber of Mike White. Mike White actually wasn't even a name that I was thinking about, but Mike White is basically as competent of a backup as you can get. As Reed talked about on Off the Bench, we all remember the game with the New York Jets when the Bengals kind of went on the road as favorites, and we thought, it was just a 1 o'clock Sunday game. Thought it was going to be a game that Cincinnati wouldn't have many issues with. Burrow, of course, was playing. Basically, everybody was healthy, and you got absolutely torched by Mike White. And Mike White, later in the year for the Jets, he started some games that season and was pretty competent, did a nice job for New York. That obviously was the game of his career against Cincinnati. Spent some time in Miami as the backup. But he's a real cerebral player. He doesn't make too many mistakes. He understands offenses, and he understands, hey, I need to get the ball to my playmakers early in space and let them do the job. So if, he is in a situation where he is called upon, I think you got to feel decent if you're the Cincinnati Bengals as far as your third quarterback, right? As far as a third quarterback goes, I think Mike White's a pretty good option, right? Burrow, of course, is your 1. Browning's your 2. And if something happens with him, Mike White is a fine guy to go to. Sean Clifford also being signed to the practice squad. By the way, both of these guys are practice squad signings as we're live here on this show. Maybe they'll do something with Brett Rippon. He was their practice squad quarterback. Maybe, I don't know, is he the backup for Jake Browning this Sunday? It feels like that'll probably be the case, right? It'd be borderline shocking to have one of these guys that brought in here on a Tuesday morning be the backup to Jake Browning. So I would venture to believe that Rippon's going to be the backup, at least for this Minnesota game, and then eventually we'll see probably Mike White have that designation, but we'll see. Sean Clifford, of course, his college career at Penn State was interesting, right? I think sometimes there was really high expectations for Sean Clifford that he wasn't able to live up to. I think he has some limitations as far as his ability to, layer throws, hit the deep ball, those touch passes, right? He's a smart guy and he's got a big arm, but, he never really got to his full potential, as some people thought at Penn State. And Penn State kind of just, they'd win all the games they were supposed to win, but anytime they were in a big game, Clifford really wasn't able to get them over the hump. Obviously spent some time in Green Bay. That to me is intriguing, right? And clearly something Cincinnati values as well, right? I think Green Bay, if you look at all the organizations across the National Football League, they're a top 3 or 4 organization. I think you can throw Baltimore in there, and I think you can throw certainly the Kansas City Chiefs in there as well. But I'm looking at Green Bay. They are a well-oiled machine up there in Wisconsin, and the Bengals certainly tapped into that, bringing in Jerry Montgomery, right, as their defensive line coach. He spent some time in Green Bay, and of course TJ Slayton, their starting nose tackle, he spent time in Green Bay as well. So the the experience that he had in a system like Matt LaFleur's, a complex offense, right, I think that could perhaps translate over to what Cincinnati is trying to do here. And again, it's an emergency situation if you go to a guy like Clifford. And when you make a signing where you bring in Mike White and Sean Clifford, that means the leash for Jake Browning is pretty long, right? There were some people out there saying, well, let's bring in a guy that could perhaps challenge Jake Browning a little bit to, make sure he's at the top of his game. And if he struggles for a couple of games and you drop a few games in a row, maybe you make a change at quarterback. Bringing in Mike White and Sean Clifford as your 2 signings, they're riding with Jake Browning, right? If he's healthy, he's going to be out there and be the quarterback for Cincinnati. Even if he continues to throw 3 interceptions a game, he's going to be that guy, and you kind of understand that based on that signing. Just talking a little bit about some of the other names. Again, we were going to have a full-blown, long segment about guys that Cincinnati could perhaps bring in before they signed Mike White and Sean Clifford. Kirk Cousins is a name that was thrown around. To me, that always was a bit ridiculous, right? Kirk Cousins is the best backup in the National Football League, I would say, right? Browning, does he do things better than Cousins? Sure, but if you had, executives and NFL coaches sit there and say, all right, let's rank the backup quarterbacks in the National Football League, I don't know if it'd be unanimous, but I think most people would say Kirk Cousins is that number 1 guy. But unfortunately for teams that might have interest in acquiring Kirk Cousins, he's not getting paid like a backup. Dude, $27 million this year, and over the next 2 years, that number only goes up. So for Cincinnati to do that for a backup when they have a 2-0 record and a guy in Jake Browning that has played before and has had success for this football team, that would have just been a completely just head scratcher, right? And I don't know necessarily if Kirk Cousins and his lack of mobility would be the best situation given this Cincinnati Bengals offensive line and all the troubles that they have had along the offensive line. Winston was a name I think a lot of people wanted I understand the upside of bringing Jameis Winston in. He's the third guy in New York right now, and Jameis Winston clearly is not a third-string quarterback. They're just kind of structured that way because Jackson Dart, right, their rookie, he's the backup for the Giants. But Jameis Winston, if you want to talk about best backup quarterbacks in the National Football League, it would probably be him and Cousins as 1A and 1B as your backup quarterbacks. Obviously spent a lot of years in Tampa, had the issues taking care of the football, and has bounced around in free agency since, was with the Saints, of course with Cleveland last year, and now this year with the New York Football Giants. But there are elements of Jameis's game and just how he is, like the interviews, right? He's just a complete character, and he would bring a lot of eyeballs to the Cincinnati Bengals, and it would be fun seeing him cut it loose to these wide receivers, and that's exactly what Jameis Winston would do. But if you were in a spot where Brett Rippon was your backup quarterback instead of Jake Browning, or maybe it was just Jake Browning, but he didn't have the experience of playing in 2023 and winning football games, maybe you entertain that idea of bringing in Jameis Winston and saying, yeah, we'll throw you a 5th, 6th, 7th round pick in order to acquire him. But if you're in a spot with the Bengals with Jake Browning, it just wouldn't make any sense, right? Especially if you brought him in, you traded, gave up a draft pick, which would be borderline historic for Cincinnati to do that. Obviously, a team that doesn't frequently make many trades. We saw them kind of break that trend last year at the deadline when they brought in a running back and actually made a trade for a 7th round pick. But I don't think that Cincinnati is going to get into the habit of doing stuff like that. And also, if you bring in Jameis Winston and Jake Browning throws 1 interception against Minnesota on the first drive, you got a percentage of your fan base sitting there calling for Jameis Winston, and that's just not something you need to do, especially when you have a 2-0 record, what Cincinnati has right now. Do they deserve to be 2-0? No. Do they look like a 2-0 football team? No. But at the end of the day, that doesn't matter. Their record is 2-0, kind of the flip of what we've seen in years past where they're sitting there and they're not 2-0 and they have a losing record, but they're like, we're all sitting there saying, they're so much better than this. Well, it's kind of the inverse this year, right, where it's like, yeah, I don't know if this team's very good. Even if Joe Burrow was out there, the defense, yeah, they've gotten better, but they've still got some question marks. The offensive line, yeah, they brought in a new coach. Yeah, they got some new pieces, but it still isn't very good. No. I mean, they have a 2-0 record, right? So it's not, kind of interesting that we're kind of operating in this situation, considering usually it's the other way around for this Bengals football team. But it's just the reality of the situation right now. Malik Willis, also a name that was mentioned yesterday. That's certainly intriguing, I would say. I think that quarterback draft when Malik Willis was drafted by the Titans, it was just so bad. I mean, Kenny Pickett and Malik Willis were like the 2 best quarterbacks, is what people said in that draft. And he obviously really struggled in Tennessee. Didn't even really play much, right? And then he ends up in Green Bay. And he had to fill in for Jordan Love a few games last year, and he did a terrific job. So the Bengals reportedly yesterday were interested in Malik Willis. Again, that's a guy that's mobile, right? Something you probably want considering the issues that you have along the offensive line. So that was a little bit entertaining. But Green Bay is sitting there saying, Jordan Love, he's had an injury history. And, of course, Malik Willis has won games for Green Bay, so they probably view him similar to how the Bengals view Jake Browning, and they weren't going to want to give him up without significant compensation. There was one name that I was looking forward to discussing here on this show before the Bengals made their signings. I thought Taylor Heineke was a guy that probably would be at the top of the list for Cincinnati. He has that mobility. He's a gamer, right? He's had success with the Commanders. He's played a lot of football, lost the backup job in Los Angeles to Trey Lance, so he's a free agent. I thought he would be a guy that they would bring in. But obviously they went in a different direction with Mike White and Sean Clifford. Trevor Siemian as well. If you remember a couple of years ago, there was a battle for Joe Burrow's backup job between Jake Browning and Trevor Siemian. Browning obviously ended up winning that battle, thankfully. And, Siemian right now is, I believe, on Brian Callahan's practice squad with the Tennessee Titans. He was a guy that could potentially be brought in. Desmond Ridder, of course, who was here in the preseason, has the Cincinnati ties, of course, playing at UC for the Bearcats. Didn't love what you saw from him in the preseason, and I think it's pretty obvious that the coaching staff feels that way because that's an easy guy that you could have brought in, and they opted to go with Clifford over Desmond Ridder. I think that is very, very telling there. Andy Dalton, what a story that would have been, right? He's the backup to Bryce Young in Carolina. You could have gotten him for a late-round pick. There's the continuity there with Zac Taylor. That would have been really interesting and a major storyline, especially here in Cincinnati if you brought in Andy Dalton. But again, lack of mobility behind this offensive line, probably not very intriguing. And then Josh Dobbs is another name that I wrote down. Kyler Murray's backup in Arizona. The Pastronaut, right, has bounced around the NFL. And I think people view him as a guy that's a solid backup, and he's such a smart guy. He can come in and really pick up an offense quickly and play if he had to. But at the end of the day, Cincinnati wants to roll with Jake Browning. That shouldn't surprise anybody. And I think you should feel pretty good if you're the Cincinnati Bengals that if something were to happen to Jake Browning and you are on your third quarterback, you have Mike White, right? Again, if the Bengals are on their third quarterback, probably can say, yep, we'll see you in 2026. But as far as third quarterbacks go, I think Mike White's a pretty good one to have, and we'll see if he ever gets called upon as a potential starter for the Cincinnati Bengals. So that's kind of the backup quarterback conversation piece of today's show. So now we'll transition into a different topic, and that is multiple things can be true when evaluating Cincinnati and where they're at right now and Joe Burrow's injuries and the bad offensive line play. It can't just be one thing where we sit there and say, yep, it's the offensive line's fault, it's the personnel's fault, 100% their fault. Or it can't be a situation where you say, yep, ownership, front office, it's 100% their fault they didn't surround Joe Burrow with competent pieces along the offensive line. Oh, it's 100% Zac Taylor's fault because he won't change how he operates with spreading things out and constantly being in shotgun with Joe Burrow. No, you can't say that. It's not one person's fault. And also of note, when you're talking about these injuries for Joe Burrow, lots of them have happened on just basic football plays, right? The calf in training camp, basic football play. Right? I think it was like a play fake, and he's rolling out to his right, comes up gimpy with the calf. He's just playing football, right? The sack this past week with the toe injury. Yeah, it's not good that his pocket continually collapses on seemingly every other play. That's a problem. But, from a sack perspective, it wasn't that bad, right? It's a sack in the NFL, right? It's not like his head came off or it's not like they were diving at his knees or anything. It was just a basic sack, and he got hurt on it. The wrist thing, right? He fell on his wrist earlier in the game, and then he tried to throw it to the end zone, which he didn't try. He succeeded in throwing it to the end zone. It was a touchdown, but then, he tore the ligament in his wrist. Just basic football plays. The only one that wasn't was the knee, his rookie year, when his knee just got completely ruined in that game against Washington. That's really the only time where you can sit there and say, offensive line's fault for how that transpired. Now, all the other times that he gets blown up, I understand, right? Because he's been hit more than anybody in the NFL. I totally get that. But as it relates to specifically those injuries, for the most part, they've been just basic football plays. And that certainly is something that, especially if you're Joe Burrow and a Cincinnati Bengals fan, that's got to be tough to digest, right? Because it's not like they've been these crazy plays for the most part, just basic football stuff. It's a contact sport, and he's found himself suffering serious injuries on some of those. Another thing that's true is the Bengals have never put a great offensive line in front of Joe Burrow, despite continually trying to, right? They've drafted guys. We talked about this yesterday on the show. They drafted Dylan Fairchild. They drafted Amarius Mims, right? They drafted Cordell Volson, right? All guys that they drafted. And they also made allocations in free agency, bringing in guys. Orlando Brown Jr., we talked about that. That was one of the splashiest moves in free agency a couple of years ago, and honestly, it was a shocking move that Cincinnati went out there and made that type of move. Has that worked out? He's been solid, right? But he hasn't been that guy that just doesn't get beat and is that left tackle that is just unbelievable, and you don't even have to worry about pressure coming from that side. No, he hasn't been that good, but he's been solid for you, right? Ted Karras, Alex Kappa in free agency. Ted Karras is a guy that you've extended twice. Clearly, you like Ted Karras as a leader and as a center of your football team. He's done a nice job. Kappa, when he first got here, he was okay. Mind you, he was on that line in Tampa Bay that won a Super Bowl with Tom Brady. So bringing him in, that seemed at the time like a pretty good move. Obviously, hindsight will tell you that, it didn't end up translating here in Cincinnati as he was one of the worst guards against pass rush in the National Football League. That was an issue. Also, the organization opted to pay T. Higgins $30 million per year, and I think a large reason why they did that is because Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and to some extent Zac Taylor were pushing for it. If they don't pay T. Higgins, can they go get a big-time offensive lineman and pay him a bunch of money? Yeah, they can. But all of us, maybe not all of us, but I certainly was, saying that they needed to bring T. Higgins back. Going into last year, in 2024, I was kind of like, all right, this is going to be teased last year here with the Bengals, and we'll see how it goes. And then as the season progressed, and he wasn't out there with the hamstring early, and then he was out there, it became pretty obvious that, this Bengals offense without T. Higgins is not the same. Yeah, there's a lot of upside with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, but they need T. Higgins. And then, you have Joe Burrow after the Monday night game in Dallas coming out saying, yeah, T. Higgins is a need. And it's like, Joe Burrow, is the face of the franchise, the face of the organization. He's going out there saying, yeah, we need T. Higgins. That's certainly very, very noteworthy when you're talking about the Cincinnati Bengals, right? And then he goes out there against Denver late in the year and basically wins that game with Joe Burrow. And then it was like, okay, yeah, we do need T. Higgins. And then the organization, a lot of people in the fan base, lots of people on the football team saying, we need T. Higgins. What did the Bengals do? They went out there and they got it done. I still think it was the right move, even after this injury. All right, I think paying T. Higgins was the right move. But now you're sitting there with no Joe Burrow, and you could have allocated some resources there towards your offensive line. Instead, you opted to pay Joe Burrow. Another thing that is true is that they still, despite paying those two wide receivers, probably could have done a better job addressing that position earlier on in free agency. Right? Lucas Patrick was the guy you got at the end of free agency, and he was a guy that was a journeyman. He bounced around the National Football League and was never looked at as that guy, that bona fide starter for any team in the National Football League. And ultimately, Cincinnati kind of, as they addressed the media in the offseason, what have you, they were trying to spin it like, oh, yeah, we feel pretty good about Lucas Patrick being a starter for us. And the rest of us were sitting there scratching our heads saying, well, he hasn't really been a starter for large chunks of his career. He's been more of a career backup that has bounced across numerous different teams, and they were looking at him to be their starter, and obviously he was going into that Cleveland game. And then Dalton Reisner, right, who has had some success in the NFL with Minnesota over the past couple of years, right? And at the end of the day, there's a reason why he was available a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, he had interest from some other teams, but if this was a guy that was, a great offensive lineman, he would have been long gone by the time Cincinnati had the opportunity to potentially sign him. And then next thing you know, he's out there for this Bengals team after one singular padded practice. Pretty crazy that he's out there protecting Joe Burrow at the time after one padded practice with the Cincinnati Bengals. So even if you were sitting there saying, yeah, we'll pay Jamar Chase, we'll pay T. Higgins, you were in a spot where you probably should have addressed the offensive line a little bit more there as well. As I mentioned, 3 of the 4 big Burrow injuries have been just normal football stuff, right? It hasn't been a situation where there are these crazy plays and he just gets, blasted and then he's, mangled on the ground. We've seen those plays happen, but he's been able to pop up and be just fine. The ones where he's getting hurt, for the most part, besides the knee, of course, are just regular football plays. And also, I know some people push back on like, oh, how could you, say it's the way he plays. Like, come on, that's just ridiculous. Nah, there's some truth to that. The way Joe Burrow plays is different than the way most every other quarterback plays in the National Football League, and that is why, in large part, he is so great because of the things he can do at extending plays and whatever the case may be. And the style of play that Cincinnati operates with, and Zac Taylor really defended, as we played earlier in the on off the bench, really defended his play style of all the shotgun stuff with Burrow. Right, he doesn't like being under center. He doesn't like turning his back on the defense. What they want him to do is use his elite processing skills, because nobody probably processes at the rate that Joe Burrow does in the National Football League. That is his superpower. They don't want him turning his back to the defense. They want to keep everything in front of him and let him process and let him operate and let him cut it loose. And that makes it hard to play offensive line, right? When you don't necessarily have that under center threat, where you don't necessarily have a ton of let's line up, let's run some play action, especially if you're not running the football well. It's a lot easier for a defense, regardless of the score in the game, to really pin their ears back and get after the quarterback when you're in a spot where you're constantly in the gun with lots of wide receivers lined up in obvious situations where it's like, okay, they're obviously going to throw the football here. It's tough for an offensive line, and obviously his playing style makes it a bit more difficult too, as far as holding on to the football and extending plays. And Joe Burrow gets rid of the ball quickly when he's just reading and going, but it's when things break down and he tries to extend. When the play works and one of his first couple of reads is there, he's catching it and he's cutting it loose, right? The stats will tell you that. But when things break down, he likes to hold on to the ball. He likes to jump around the pocket, and that can make some things very difficult for Cincinnati. So the bottom line is this. Lots of things can be true. There is not a single reason why, this injury happened, right? And again, the last thing is that, he's injury prone. We talked about it yesterday. It sucks, but it's just the reality of the situation. It is what it is. It sucks for Joe. You're sick for him. You're sick for yourself as a fan. But that's just the reality of where things are at with the Cincinnati Bengals right now. So multiple things can be true as it relates to the Bengals' ineptitude to keep Joe Burrow healthy. Some of it is them as an organization. Some of it is offensive line. Some of it is coaching. Some of it is bad luck. Some of it is him being injury prone. Some of it is him in the way that he plays quarterback. All these things happen. And unfortunately, this is going to be something that follows Joe Burrow for the rest of his career. Even if he's healthy for the next 5 years, it's like, well, he could get hurt at any point, and he's had, 3 basically season-ending injuries, as it relates to being a starting quarterback in the National Football League. And that's just something that is going to continue to follow him around. And one last thing I'll say before we kind of transition a little bit to other topics here on today's show is that I'm starting to worry a little bit about up here from Joe Burrow, the mental. Because these injuries, man, look, I was a high school athlete, right? I wasn't a college athlete, certainly not a professional athlete either. But, when you continually get hurt and you have to rehab and it's a different injury and it's a different body part, rehab, man, it's a lonely place, right? Because, you might be showing up to the facility or whatever, but it's early mornings and late nights when you are rehabbing, trying to get back to where you were. And that's the thing. He's just trying to get back to where he was, right? Or even close to where he was. It's not like he can rehab to get better. No, he's going the other direction, right? Because he's hurt. That's just the nature of rehabbing an injury. And, Joe Burrow, he's got, from what we can tell on the outside, seems like he's got, a very stable family as far as his parents go, and they're going to help him out. But, it's not like he's got some big family or, a wife to lean on or whatever. It's just him. And he's had to go through all these injuries himself. And you start to worry a little bit because Joe Burrow has been this, Superman, Iron Man type of guy with incredible focus and incredible resilience and incredible toughness. But at some point, you got to wonder if that snaps at all. Hopefully it doesn't, right? For Joe's sake and certainly for, Bengals fans, for our sake as well. Because with Andrew Luck, it snapped, right? And, the comparisons there, when you take a look at the stats of, how much they're getting hit. Luck played 6 years. This is year 6 for Burrow, and some of the stuff is eerily similar. Maybe we'll break down the exact numbers on a later show, but you just got to wonder, and especially with Luck, because he, in the same way, he was so tough, right? He took the punishment, he got up, he got hurt, he rehabbed it, said all the right things, was locked in, was, that ultra aggressive, tough alpha guy, and then he just kind of, out of nowhere, he's done. I'm not suggesting Joe Burrow is going to retire. I'm not saying that at all, but you have to worry a little bit about the mental of Joe Burrow. This guy's won the comeback player of the year twice. Now, he did say, hopefully he's never up for it again, but he said if he's up for it again, he's going to win it again. So, we'll see. I don't know how that exactly works, if he plays the end of this year, if he could still be the comeback player of the year in 2026. I don't know. But bottom line, he's going to miss a lot of time this year with the toe injury, and we'll see. And I'm worried about, how he's going to come back and handle this, right? Especially when everything had kind of gone right leading up to this point, right? You win your first game. You don't have people, you didn't play well offensively, but you didn't have people say, oh, you're 0-1 again. You win your first game. You had a great training camp. You played in the preseason. You worked some kinks out in the preseason. You paid Jamar. You paid T. Everything was lined up for you to have an incredible year once again. And then, unfortunately, you had the injury. So, I don't know the next time that we're going to hear from Joe Burrow, the next time he's going to address the media or what have you. But, I think we're all a little bit anxious to see what his kind of mindset is like, because obviously it's incredibly frustrating for him. But, is this something where he's going to continue to be able to fight through and continue to battle through? I'd certainly hope so, because the last thing you want to have to deal with is thinking about life without Joe Burrow here in Cincinnati. Again, we're kind of working a little bit ahead here on today's show, but I do want to bring up a couple of points. At some point, should the Bengals draft a quarterback? Yeah. Not in the first round, not in the second round, but maybe like a third or fourth round guy. Maybe you're at the point where you need to do that, especially if you lose Jake Browning at some point. Now, maybe you keep Jake Browning, and he's fine being the backup here, whatever, and then you're just fine. But maybe you need to allocate a mid-round draft pick to another quarterback. But the suggestion that you could perhaps think about moving away from Joe Burrow is just completely ridiculous, right? I don't care if this happens 3 more times to him, right? As long as when he's out there, he shows you that he is still an elite quarterback, you just got to keep riding with him, right? And, something that I have said, if the Cincinnati Bengals can't win a world championship with Joe Burrow, they will never win a world championship. I believe that. And obviously there's no way to really measure that, right? But that's, at the end of the day, that is what I believe. If you can't do it with Joe Burrow, you will never be able to do it. I don't care who the coach is. I don't care what ownership looks like. I don't care what your draft picks are or the guys that are on your team or who the quarterback is. You're not going to be able to do it if you can't do it with Joe Burrow. So, I just really hope everybody certainly stays patient and that Joe is able to battle through this mentally, rehab it, and be back to a situation where he can, play winning football for this team, whether it's the end of this year or if it's not until 2026. But certainly the mental of Joe Burrow is something that I think isn't really getting talked about a lot. That probably should be a little bit. All right. Let's transition a little bit here. So the Bengals, of course, as we talked about, if you're just joining us, they did sign 2 quarterbacks early this morning, Mike White, Sean Clifford, both to the practice squad. As of now, we will see if at some point one of those guys is the backup. Again, I expect Brett Rippon to be the backup for Jake Browning this week in Minnesota. And then after that, maybe we'll see an adjustment made, whether it be Mike White or Sean Clifford as the backup quarterback for the Cincinnati Bengals. Invite everybody to hit that thumbs up icon if you haven't done so already. And, of course, hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. YouTube.com/ChatterboxSports, live every single day, Monday through Friday after Off the Bench from 11 to noon. Do want to spend a little bit of time talking about college football here. We had a great slate of weekends or games over the weekend a couple of days ago, and some more good games coming up this week. And that's kind of just the nature of, conference realignment, the NIL era. You're starting to see more good college football games on a weekly basis. 2 weeks from now, you flip it on, and the slate is just unbelievable. Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, Washington. There's a long list of incredible games in 2 weeks. There's some solid ones this week as well. But for the people saying, NIL and conference realignment and transfer portal, it's going to ruin the game. Maybe there are some aspects that you're not happy with, right? I don't think 18-year-olds getting paid millions and millions of dollars and universities having to shift the way that they raise money for these kids. Yeah, I don't think necessarily that's the greatest thing. There needs to be a salary cap on it, right? I can't imagine being 18 years old and getting some of the money that these players are. But at the end of the day, it's working, right? More eyeballs, more than ever, are watching college football, and that's going to continue to increase as time goes on. So if they can just kind of figure out NIL a little bit more, regulate it a little bit more, because it's really just a free-for-all here at this point, I think college football is going to continue to take steps in the right direction. Also, the playoff, the 12-team playoff, yeah, that was a lot of fun. There was a lot that needed to be tinkered with. Going into year 2 of the 12-team playoff. They have done that, and I'm expecting it to be even better this year. And then obviously we hope we get more competitive games throughout the playoff as well. But Texas A&M and Notre Dame was a big game this past weekend. It was one of our best bets of the weekend. It did not go our way as Texas A&M was able to win that game over Notre Dame. And there's definitely multiple ways that you can look at this when you're evaluating this football game. I think one, if you look at the Notre Dame side, there's a couple of takeaways that you can make, right? Marcus Freeman, he's one of the best coaches in college football, does a great job of recruiting. He's the leader of men, right? Everybody loves saying that. He checks off a lot of boxes as it relates to being a head coach at a big-time program like Notre Dame. But they're off to an 0-2 start. Of course, they made the national championship last year after losing to Northern Illinois, went on an incredible run, were able to knock off some really good teams, and then kind of just ran into a buzzsaw there in the national title game against Ohio State. But they're an 0-2 team, and they're clearly the best 0-2 team in the country. I don't think that really even is debatable. And, going into the game, it felt like such a big game for Notre Dame because you look at their schedule and you sit there and go, man, if you lose this game, I don't know if there's a path for you to get into the playoffs, obviously, without being in a conference, despite the fact that you could potentially run the table. And that was kind of my mindset going into that game against A&M. That was kind of why I expected them to play so well, because I thought they really would have their backs up against the wall, understanding that, yeah, it's our second game of the season, but our season's kind of on the line here. And, I thought in large part they really did show up and played a really good game. There are some concerns when you're talking about the Fighting Irish. I think defensively is the biggest one, right? Al Golden obviously leaves Notre Dame. He's now the defensive coordinator for the Cincinnati Bengals, and they're kind of similarly to what they were doing last year. They're playing a lot of man coverage, despite the fact that Al Golden is no longer the defensive coordinator. And when you're playing man coverage, especially in college, you have to be able to put pressure in the quarterback. If you're playing man and can't get home on the quarterback, it is going to be a problem for you, and that's exactly the problem that Notre Dame ran into in that game. They were playing a ton of man coverage. I believe they only had one sack. Maybe they've only had one sack throughout the course of both of their games between Miami and Texas A&M. That is not getting it done. Obviously, Texas A&M ended up scoring, 41 points and winning that football game. So defensively, you certainly have some question marks as it relates to the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Offensively, C.J. Carr, I think, is a really solid quarterback. He's only started 2 games. Of course, he's lost both of them. For the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, but I think he's going to be just fine. I hope people in South Bend kind of stick with him and understand that he is a solid quarterback. He has some untimely turnovers, right? That's something that he's going to get picked apart a little bit for with the turnovers that he has had in critical moments late in the game. You could argue, if he doesn't make those turnovers, maybe Notre Dame is 2-0. That's very certainly could be the case. I thought the first game, the play calling and just kind of the game plan really as it related to C.J. Carr and Notre Dame wasn't where it needed to be, right? Jeremiah Love, in my opinion, is the 3rd best player in college football behind Caleb Downs and Jeremiah Smith, and they didn't really feature him as much as I think they should have in week 1, and they certainly adjusted to that in week 2 as they went to him early and often throughout that game, and I think that certainly helped out C.J. Carr. But if they're in a spot where they can really lean on Love and make things a little bit easier on C.J. Carr, I think they're going to find a way to ultimately win some football games. And when you look at their schedule, like I said, not really a ton of big-time games. But if you're a Notre Dame fan, there's 2 teams that you really need to be rooting for, and that is NC State and that is USC. USC is kind of slowly coming out of nowhere. They haven't played anybody. I get that 100%, but nobody was talking about Lincoln Riley and the Trojans coming into this year, and all of a sudden they've been looking pretty good against lesser opponents, obviously. But if they can continue to win, Notre Dame, of course, has the Trojans on the schedule. That could be a big-time win that Notre Dame would need to vault into the college football playoff. Same with NC State. That's another team that not really many people early on were talking about. They have an opportunity to string together some wins and be kind of a formidable team that is on Notre Dame's schedule. So if you're a Notre Dame fan, you really need to be rooting for those 2 teams there. And we'll see. You got a really good coach. You got a solid quarterback in C.J. Carr. If you can find ways to rush the passer a little bit better than you have these first 2 games, or maybe just shift your playing style in defense, right? If you can't get home on the passer, maybe you're going to have to adjust what you're doing defensively and stop running so much man coverage and have some more zones where you force quarterbacks on the opposing team to kind of take what's in front of them, and then you swarm to the ball and you tackle. Maybe that's an adjustment you'll have to make if you're Marcus Freeman, but overall the defense needs to be much better. Obviously, if you watch the game, I feel terrible for Tyler Buckner, right? Really, that game should have been going into overtime, really. Notre Dame scored really, really late. I forget how much time exactly was on the clock, but they took the lead late in that game and to go up 6, and then they're going out just to kick a basic extra point, and Tyler Buckner is the holder for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. I did a triple take when I saw that, watching the game with some buddies. We're like, we thought it was Tyler Buckner's brother. We were like, that's got to be his younger brother, right? But no, it actually was Tyler Buckner. Buckner, of course, was a quarterback at Notre Dame, and then he transferred to Alabama, and then he came back to Notre Dame, and he was like, I'm going to play lacrosse, actually, and not football, and now he's back on the Notre Dame football team, and he's holding extra points. Like, just a crazy career for him. Good snap, just drops it, right? And, obviously, at the end of the day, he's a college athlete. I think some people nationally feel like, they can just kind of absolutely rip on these college athletes, because they're getting paid now. At the end of the day, they are still, 18 to 21-year-olds, right, for the most part. So, Buckner, obviously, he's sick to his stomach after that play. And then A&M is able to drive down the field again with minimal time on the clock and score some points. And obviously, they execute their extra point. They win the football game, come into South Bend, and, really take the hearts there of Notre Dame. But we spent some time there talking about the Irish. If you flip it and talk about A&M, that's a pretty good football team. right? They've done some good things over the course of these first few weeks. I think Marcel Reed really has taken a step in the right direction for the Texas A&M Aggies, right? I think, he kind of burst onto the scene last year in that LSU game, if you remember that, and he really didn't throw the ball. I think he only threw it a handful of times. He was just running, and he was running right through Brian Kelly's defense, making all types of plays, and people were like, oh, Marcel Reed is going to be the next great thing. And then throughout the rest of the year, he kind of struggled when it came to throwing the ball, right? Really, you see this in the NFL, right? You have to be able to win within the pocket. You can get a little bit away from it in college football and still find ways to win. But I think especially as the college game becomes more like the NFL game and just operationally how it's run more like the NFL now, you have to be able to win from within the pocket. And Marcel Reed clearly spent tons of time this offseason working on that. I've been really impressed with what he's been able to do through the air. Mike Elko, obviously their head coach, is going into now, I believe, his second year as the head coach for Texas A&M, and I think he's a great fit, right? Texas A&M, that's not an easy job, right? It's a big fan base, a huge stadium, lots of expectations, and a very difficult conference, obviously, in the SEC, and I think Mike Elko has done a tremendous job, and he's put his team in the right spots here through a couple of weeks to win football games. Now, if Texas A&M is to be taken seriously in the SEC and really be taken seriously nationally as someone that could perhaps win the SEC or compete for a national title, there's a step in which they need to make. They need to beat the teams that they should beat, right? And that might seem obvious, but that's kind of what has held some other teams back from taking that next step, right? What makes, Ohio State so good? Yeah, they've got the incredible players, the 5-star talent, the great coaching staff. They win big games. They won the national title last game, but you don't see Ohio State get upset and lose these games where they're favored by double digits, right? For when Nick Saban was the head coach at Alabama, obviously that never happened there as well. And a team like Penn State, right? I think a lot of us, myself definitely included, think Penn State is grossly overrated, and preseason number one is just outlandish, in my opinion, as it relates to ranking the Penn State and Nittany Lions. But part of the reason they continue to get hype going into each year is because they beat the teams they should beat. Right? Penn State doesn't lose games where they're significant favorites. Now, do they win big games? No, they don't do that either, which ultimately is what has held them back. But the reason they get so much hype around them and so many people seemingly nationally try to believe in Penn State is because they take care of business when they are supposed to take care of business. But when they find themselves in bigger games, obviously they have struggled with that in the past. So that's kind of the next step, really, for Texas A&M. They've got some really good wide receivers on that football team there as well. It felt like any time one of their playmakers got the ball in space, they had an ability to perhaps shake loose and create a big play for that Texas A&M offense. So certainly a very interesting team. I think, Tennessee, Georgia, LSU, Texas, Oklahoma, those teams kind of get a lot of recognition as far as being at the top of the SEC. But I think a team like Texas A&M is certainly a team that is a force to be reckoned with, really, as you progress throughout the rest of this schedule. But now conference play really starting to kick up. You had some really good out-of-conference games here through the first couple of weeks, but I'm really excited for conference play, and really probably going to break loose in the Big Ten and the SEC, and that certainly will be fun to watch, and we'll certainly have it covered here on the show. All right, so 2 Monday night games yesterday, and for the record, I don't like that at all, right? And let's just get back to Thursday night game, play everybody on Sunday night game, 1 Monday night game. They do this early in the year where they play 2 Monday night games, right? I didn't even know the first one was starting at 7. That to me is just, that's not when Monday Night Football starts. If you want to sit there and say during the season, yeah, we'll actually switch it to 7, fine. But if you're always going to have it at 8:15, 8:30, whatever, and then you throw one at 7, then you throw one at 10 on a Monday, I got issues with it. I love Chris Fowler and Dan Orlovsky. They do a tremendous job, so it's great to see them get a little Monday night action. But the 2 games on Monday night, I've got an issue with that. But I digress. That's probably a conversation for a different day. But Tampa Bay, Houston, that was the first game. Baker Mayfield and C.J. Stroud. The Buccaneers, I love that team. I absolutely love that team. I considered them, said this on the show, kind of coming into this year, a dark horse NFC championship type team, perhaps could get to a Super Bowl. I think they've got a lot of good pieces. They've got a solid young running back in Bucky Irving. He really runs hard. They've got great wide receivers, great weaponry. Doesn't rival what they have here in Cincinnati. But Mike Evans, most underrated player of my lifetime, probably. That guy's still balling at a high level. Emeka Egbuka appears to be a pick that they hit absolutely out of the park, and they'll have Godwin coming back in a couple of weeks there as well. And Baker Mayfield, man, the guy's unbelievable. You can say what you want about him, right? But I think, since coming into the league, 8 years ago when Cleveland took him number 1 overall, he has just handled everything perfectly. Since certainly leaving Cleveland, right? There were some times where he would get too fired up with the media and he would get rubbed the wrong way and people would talk about him nationally and he felt like he needed to fire back. But he was just a young guy that always had a chip on his shoulder, right? Not recruited, right? Wasn't on scholarship, walk on. Next thing you know, he's winning the Heisman Trophy and then being drafted number 1 overall in the NFL. So he still had that chip on his shoulder, and I think sometimes he got a little bit out of pocket with how he handled things in front of the media and at the podium. But ultimately, Cleveland moved off him. Clearly the biggest mistake of what is a laundry list of mistakes for the Cleveland Browns. Their biggest one in recent memory was moving off Baker Mayfield. And, he bounced around a little bit, right? He was with Carolina, and that's just a dumpster fire of an organization. So he kind of grew through that, and then he had that game in L.A. with the Rams where he was, brought in, a couple of days before the game, and he's out there starting, and then he wins the game, right? That's the most Baker Mayfield thing ever. And then he finds a home here in Tampa Bay, and he's got a guy that's, a solid coach in Todd Bowles. I don't put him up there as far as top coaches in the league by any stretch. Really good defensively, really good defensive coordinator, really aggressive, right? Loves sending pressure. But I don't know where I view him as a great head coach, but he's stable, right? And he has that organization in a stable spot as well. And Baker has just been absolutely thriving, and I've been so impressed with him these past few years. And even in the game last night, right? Didn't throw for a ton of yards. That's a good Texans defense, right? They got Alabama guys all over that defense. Will Anderson's one of the best young defensive players in the game. That linebacker crew of Toa, Christian Harris, they caused a lot of havoc there as well. So it was difficult, and it was a really, really physical game last night too. We'll see as far as injuries, what comes out of Baker. Yesterday he was limping around, right? At time he took some big shots in the game, so we'll see if he's able to go next week because he really did get banged up. But just that drive from Baker, that is just Baker Mayfield to a T. That last drive, they send the pressure on 4th down, and he's able to find a way to get out of it and take off for a first down as he's limping, right? He's getting up, he's talking to the other team. He made some really big time throws, even the one running out to his right, and he fired it down to Ibuka. It was just a little bit too high. Mecca could have caught it. He didn't come down with it, but just the plays that he made on that drive, and obviously they were able to ultimately punch it in and win the football game. But he's got that clutch gene. There is absolutely no doubt about that, and I think Tampa Bay is a very, very serious threat as far as what they can do in the NFC. Really impressed with them in that game. Play good defense there as well, and for the most part, that's a pretty weak conference, I would say, or division as it relates to the rest of the NFL. So Tampa's going to be a problem all season long if they can stay healthy, and if Baker can stay healthy, because he certainly does get banged up based on his playing style and how he operates. But hard not to be a fan of Baker Mayfield considering all he's been through in his career and what he's been able to do over the past couple of seasons. On the flip side of that, you have Houston, which they're 0-2 now. I kind of thought, to be honest with you, they were kind of a lock to win the AFC South coming into the year. Not to say they can't do it after an 0-2 start, but I think you were hoping that C.J. Stroud would kind of get back to where he was his rookie season, or perhaps take a step in the right direction and even grow off that. I think last year was a step in the wrong direction, and we mentioned this on Off the Bench. But it was the offensive line. It was one of the worst ones in the National Football League. He was, running for his life, constantly under siege, and that was an issue for him. And I kind of gave him a free pass on that and basically said, yeah, he'll be better this year. Is our offensive line a lot better? No, but it is better, and he hasn't looked very good. These first 2 games, moving the football hasn't been good on 3rd and 4th down either. That was another thing that was so impressive with him as a rookie is, he'd find himself in these 3rd and long situations, right, where the quarterback just needs to be really good and make a really good play, and he was able to do that as a rookie. But they struggled, down in the red zone, right? I get it. They couldn't run the football for large parts of that game until they broke free with that Chubb run that gave them the lead at the time. Looked like it was going to be the winning touchdown. But no run game certainly doesn't help a young quarterback out a lot. But I think, 2nd overall pick, people were throwing him around with some of the greats in this league. saying he could perhaps get to that level. And if you want to get to that level, you have to be able to overcome. You have to be able to overcome suboptimal offensive line play. You got to be able to overcome, a lack of a run game. You got to be able to overcome, a defense that's given up some points. All the greats are able to do that. And I think C.J. Stroud was a guy that a lot of people thought was trending in that direction. But based on, his season last year and, the way he started this year, you might have to temper those expectations a little bit. I think Houston will be fine. I'm not ready to say they're cooked yet in this season, but they do really need to come up with a big win here soon to kind of get their season on the right track. But DeMeco Ryans, clearly, he can coach. And also you have postseason success with C.J. Stroud as well, as he's won a playoff game both of his first 2 years. So that certainly is something that is very noteworthy. But not a lot of people were talking about Houston coming into the year, and I was kind of scratching my head like, why is, it's a weak division. Why aren't you, saying Houston's a team that could, mess around and win a couple of playoff games? But after this starts, obviously they're in a situation where they haven't really been able to do that. The other football game last night, the Los Angeles Chargers and the Las Vegas Raiders. We'll do a segment on this probably, but the whole thing with Tom Brady, with the headset on, he's in the coach's box. Like, that to me is just bizarre. I don't want to just be that guy that sits there and complains, but if you're calling games in the NFL and you have access to all the stuff those broadcasters do, and now he's in the meetings, right? Remember last year he wasn't. He was kind of excluded from that. Well, now they're letting him do it, but then he's doing more than he was with the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, typically he's going to be working, right? If it's a Sunday, like when the Raiders play on Sunday, like he's going to be working. He's going to be calling a game. So there's probably only a couple of times where you're going to see that throughout the year. But that is interesting to me that he is, a broadcaster for the National Football League, for Fox, doing all of these games, having all this intel, and then he still has the ability to meet with the coaches and kind of help Las Vegas out. But I digress, because clearly, even if with Tom Brady, they're not able to do a ton offensively. Kind of a disaster of a game for the Raiders. They only scored, I believe, 9 points in that game. Geno, first throw of the game, is intercepted. I'm pulling for Vegas just because I really like Pete Carroll. Who knows how long he'll be the coach considering his age. But, it was a big win for them in week 1. But just when you look at that division, it's hard to imagine that they have a chance, especially like Geno, he can go out there, he can play, he can win you a few games. But, when you're going up against the Justin Herberts of the world and, the Patrick Mahomes of the world and the Sean Paytons of the world, obviously in Denver, I think you're really going to have your work cut out for you if you're the Las Vegas Raiders. Unfortunately, because Max Crosby is one of the best players in the National Football League. But, with where they're at quarterback and just kind of where they're at in the division, it's probably going to be an uphill battle for them. But really impressed with the Los Angeles Chargers. They are 2-0. The Chiefs are 0-2. It felt like coming into this year that, it was maybe time for Kansas City. Like, they might not win the division. I'm not writing them off in that regard yet, certainly. Still have another game, obviously, between the Chiefs and the Chargers. The Chiefs are going to make the playoffs. They're going to be a wild card team if they don't win the division. But things obviously trending in the right direction for L.A. Year 2 with Harbaugh. Say what you want about him. Obviously, people in this area here in Cincinnati don't have a lot of love for him. Obviously, if you're an Ohio State supporter, obviously, the suspensions at Michigan, that is very, I don't know. They kind of towed the line there with what was legal, what was illegal, and kind of paid the price there with some suspensions. But he can coach football. That's the reality of the situation. He can coach football. Wherever he goes, he wins. And wherever he goes, he makes that team immediately viable. Last year, they made the playoffs. Immediately viable. They won a playoff game? No. Was it a bad playoff game? Yes. But year 1 to come back in the NFL and do that, really impressive. And here, year 2, we'll do our power rankings tomorrow. But, they're definitely in the top 10. I can assure you that. And they're probably in the top 6 to 7 there as well. Justin Herbert, he looks really good. He looks really healthy, right? For his career up to this point, you're watching Herbert and you're like, yeah, he's out there. Yeah, he's giving it all he's got, but he just does not look right because he does not look healthy. Justin Herbert looks healthy. He looks fast. He looks lean. He's moving around. His arm looks great. So, they're a real problem as it relates to the AFC, and I think they're definitely a team that should be considered as a potential Super Bowl threat. I think coming into the season, many people didn't probably consider them in that light, but I definitely think the Chargers are trending in the right direction. Also, Quentin Johnston, right? Former first-round pick. Lots of people were saying he's a bust, but obviously the Chargers had to kind of keep giving him a chance as, he was a first-round draft pick. And finally now this year, he looks like a formidable wide receiver. And clearly Ladd McConkey can play there as well. And if Johnston can offer you some stuff down the field that can make you a much more dynamic, explosive offense. And Keenan Allen, when he's with the Chargers, he just, turns back the clocks a little bit. Obviously, last year with Chicago, wasn't that great, but now he's back in L.A. He's back with his quarterback Herbert, had a big touchdown last night in the game. So I think Keenan Allen still has a lot to offer for that offense as well. Harbaugh's always going to want to run the ball first. He's always going to be a run-first kind of guy. I was bullish on Amari and Hampton coming into the season. It's been a rough couple of games for him, I would say. We'll see how he progresses and how he improves, but make no mistake, Harbaugh's going to continue to try to run the football there with Greg Roman calling the plays for Los Angeles offensively. And if they're definitely going to be, a real big-time threat, they're going to have to figure out that run game a little bit. But if you're a Charger fan, you certainly have to be very excited with where things are at to this point. Just about out of time here on the show. I was going to spend a little bit more time talking about the Reds, but only have a few minutes here. The Reds won last night. Crazy game, right? They had a lead. They gave it up. Next thing you know, it's 6-6 late, and you're thinking, no shot. South Stewart, a big game, and all of a sudden you pick up a big win. And the Mets were idle last night, so you're able to pull within 2 games. The fact that you still have life after getting swept by the Athletics is really hard for me to wrap my head around. Now, obviously, there's more teams in the mix. It's not just you and the Mets, the Giants, and of course the Diamondbacks are now threats there as well. St. Louis, especially if you win this series, probably out of it, you feel like, for that final wild card spot. But the Reds somehow still have life. They still do things that are incredibly frustrating. That Athletics series, man, it's just brutal. Those games, just absolutely brutal if you're a Cincinnati Reds fan. But they stay alive, and, here they are with, a couple of weeks left, and we'll see if what they can do against their division. Obviously, the rest of the way, it's all divisional opponents, and we'll see if they can kind of get things back on the right track. Abbott's going tonight. That's always a good thing for the Cincinnati Redlegs. So Game 2 of the St. Louis series is tonight. The guys, of course, will have you covered. Pre-game show, and Nick Kirby, I'm not sure if he will be on for the post-game show or not, but somebody will be doing the post-game show live in the 9th inning tonight, and then obviously a post-game show after that. So obviously have a ton of Cincinnati Reds coverage here at the channel, so if you are interested in that and, of course, have not subscribed yet, I invite you to change that and hit that sub button for me right now, youtube.com/chatterboxsports. We'll spend more time tomorrow talking about the Cincinnati Reds, hopefully a victory for them. We'll begin to turn the page a little bit tomorrow as well as we talk a little bit more in depth about the Minnesota Vikings. Again, McCarthy is out. Carson Wentz is in. It's my belief that that's probably not ideal for Cincinnati. I think I would rather face J.J. McCarthy than face Carson Wentz, but we'll see. I would not be surprised at all if Carson Wentz stepped into the game Sunday with Kevin O'Connell and looks like, I'm not going to say a world beater, but looks like a competent NFL quarterback. Obviously, he's got skill guys there. Minnesota has an incredible home field advantage there as well, so the Bengals are going to have their work cut out for them. We'll turn the page, talk a little bit about that matchup tomorrow. Obviously, if there's any Burrow updates, injury updates, with the Cincinnati Bengals. Don't anticipate many of those coming tomorrow, but we will discuss that there as well. And also had Reed's Power Rankings on Off the Bench today. We will get to mine tomorrow. We might just test out that graphic that Casey McAllister made for us here on the show. But that'll do it for our Tuesday edition of the Stone Shield Show. Again, podcast will be up in a matter of moments, wherever you get your podcasts, and also plenty of clips on YouTube as we kind of break up some of these clips. There will be a couple of segments each day that go on our YouTube page. Mind you, we're putting out a lot of content now on YouTube, so you might not get a notification when we release a video. Obviously, I only have so many pushes every whatever hours with YouTube there, so I invite you to always look at our YouTube page if you missed any parts of our show and you want to see a visual there as well and not just listen to the podcast. We will have clips up on our YouTube there additionally as well. But that'll do it for today's show, and we will talk to you again tomorrow morning. Take care, everybody.